All right. Hi, I'm Jess Bialecki, and I'm going to set the timer to make sure that I stick to our 15 minutes. I'm going to be talking about a topic very important to me, and I believe should be important to all of us at HGSE, and that is what I'm calling the preschool-to-prison pipeline. Many of you probably have heard of the school-to-prison pipeline, and I'm going to tell you today why I think we need to reframe that and bring that back even earlier to characterize it as the preschool-to-prison pipeline. We're going to start by actually listening in to an NPR clip from September of 2016 that I think frames this issue really well.
Racial bias has been much in the news in the wake of a series of police shootings of unarmed African American men. During Monday night's presidential debate, Hillary Clinton said it's not just a problem for police.
I think, unfortunately, too many of us in our great country jump to conclusions about each other. And therefore, I think we need all of us to be asking hard questions.
That would include those who helped shape the youngest among us. A new report from the Yale Child Study Center has found evidence of implicit racial bias among preschool teachers. Here to tell us more about those findings is Corey Turner of the NPR Ed team. Good morning.
Good morning, Renee.
Sketch out for us how this study was organized, which, by the way, I imagine bias is a very hard thing to study and to nail down.
It's very hard because the moment you tell your subject that you're studying bias, you're probably not going to get an honest answer. So it's what makes this study so interesting, because the team from Yale had to create something essentially tricky. They recruited roughly 135 preschool teachers and had them watch video footage of 4 kids, a black boy, black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And they were told, watch the footage. Your job is to press the enter key on your keyboard every time you see a behavior that could become a potential challenge. Now here's the tricky part. While the teachers were doing this, the researchers were using eye scan technology to measure the trajectory of their gazes to see which kids they were watching, anticipating bad behavior.
And what happened?
What do you think?
There's bias.
How so? Where were they looking?
Teachers watch the African American boy and girl, maybe the boy even more.
Well, they spent the most time watching the black boy. And interestingly, this is true of both white and black teachers. The researchers then asked the teachers explicitly, which child did you feel required the most attention? 42% said the black boy, 34% the white boy, just 13% the white girl, and 10% the black girl.
So teachers were not necessarily seeing bad behavior where there wasn't any, but they spent the most time watching the black boy, as you just said, expecting bad behavior.
Exactly. In fact, in the video, there was no bad behavior at all. And when I spoke with lead researcher Walter Gilliam, he told me, the problem with this is if you look for something in only one place, well, that's the only place you can typically find it. And that helps make sense.
So, somewhat alarming results, right? And what I want to talk about today is some of the implications of those results. And what the reporter was about to say is that if you're looking for bad behavior in one place, you're going to find it. And what we see, and what Walter Gilliam and his research team were trying to do, was connect this issue of implicit racial bias to preschool suspensions and expulsions that are the foundation of this preschool-to-prison pipeline. Black preschool children are 3.6 times more likely to be suspended than their white peers. It's not a far leap to go then to know that students who are suspended or expelled are 10 times more likely to drop out before high school graduation. So we have kids in preschool who are being suspended, and the fact that they were suspended in preschool when they're 3 or 4 is making them 10 times more likely to drop out before high school graduation. And we know that adults who do not graduate high school are 8 times more likely at some point in their lives to be involved in the criminal justice system. So not only are we suspending and expelling our youngest children at alarming rates, but there are significant disparities in who we're sending home. And we know from decades of research, and this is probably not new to anybody here at the Ed School, that high quality early childhood education matters, right? We know at this point that it has not only short-term academic benefits, pre-K and preschool, but also substantial long-term benefits for kids, and substantial long-term benefits to society, often in the form of cost saving from criminal justice costs. So what happens if we exclude the kids who need it the most from the very programs that are meant to serve them? This is an issue, fortunately, that has been gaining a little bit of traction nationally. Walter Gilliam, who you heard in that article, produced this landmark study in 2005. And since 2005, we've seen a number of states and districts take action around putting limitations on suspension and expulsion policies for young children. We'll start out in New Jersey, which banned suspensions and expulsions in all their preschools in 2007. And there was a little bit of a gap. When Obama came into office, we saw a little more traction come in. 2014, Chicago banned suspensions in preschool through second grade. My home state of Connecticut, which I'm proud to say, in 2015 placed strict limits on out-of-school suspensions in preschool through second grade, largely due in part to Walter Gilliam's research. And a side note, I owe a lot to Walter Gilliam. I worked with him last year at the Ziegler Center, and this is where my interest in this subject came from. In 2015, Washington, D.C. passed the Preschool Student Discipline Amendment, which banned expulsions and severely limited suspensions in pre-K programs that receive pre-K public funding. In just last year, New York City banned suspensions and expulsions in pre-K, which was a huge move. The issue up until then is you're seeing there's a little bit of a geographic clustering here. In the very last year, we've started to see some traction in other parts of the country. 2016, St. Louis also banned suspensions in pre-K through second grade. And then Houston, Texas. This was a big move. First city in the state of Texas to ban suspensions in pre-K through second, except where required by state law. And then this is very late breaking. As of last week, well, maybe now 2 weeks ago, Denver Public Schools announced a plan to end suspensions and expulsions in pre-K through third grade. Notice what state I haven't mentioned, our state that we are living in right now. Somewhat surprisingly, given the reputation that Massachusetts has educationally across the nation, Massachusetts has not passed any reforms around limiting suspensions and expulsions in the early grades. I also want to note that there are challenges to using law to change practice, right? What we've seen in many of these states, Connecticut included, is that once these laws have gone into place, teachers and administrators may not suspend or expel officially, but they may use informal mechanisms to send students home or otherwise exclude them from class. So the national research I find very interesting, personally. I'm a data geek. And the recent state changes, I think, are compelling and should be reason for hope. But I want to talk today about why the disparate rates of preschool suspension and expulsion matter to me personally, and why I think they should matter to all of us here at the Ed School. Prior to coming to HCSE, I worked as a teacher and as a principal in grades pre-K through 3 in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was the founding principal at a school, Schaumburg Elementary, that you see there, and those are some of my pre-K through second grade babies. And our first year at Renew Schaumburg came at a time when a lot of schools in the city, you may know this about New Orleans, were decentralizing and were having to cut their pre-K programs due to funding. We basically got 60% of the funding per pupil for each pre-K child we enrolled, even though we wanted to pay their teachers and the same and use the same high quality instructional materials. We believed that it was worth it, and we made it work. We cut costs elsewhere to enroll 60 pre-K students. And what we found was after the first year of pre-K, 40% more of our incoming kindergarten students came into kindergarten reading on grade level. Pre-K works. And I have a lot of personal experience that, as many of you, I'm sure if you have experienced in early childhood, that can attest to that. But I want to be honest here. The same challenges that lead to the numbers that we saw here also impacted us in New Orleans. I was making decisions on a daily basis at school that were very hard when we had a kid who was having a very hard time regulating himself or herself and would hit another student, hit the teacher. cause an unsafe environment, what do you do? Do you shut the door and tell that teacher to figure it out? Do you send the student home? None of these seem like good answers. There must be alternatives. And in a city that had 4 times the murder rate last year of the national average, we know that many of our students, way too many of our students, are coming into school with significant traumatic experiences that are causing dysregulation and behavioral challenges, and we need to do more. So what are the alternatives? That's what I want to talk a little bit about today, because I think that this is where, while the laws are exciting, and as a policy geek I get excited about them, I think this is actually where we're going to make the most difference. One of the most promising models is something called early childhood mental health consultation. And basically this is where a coach, a consultant comes into a classroom over a sustained period of time and works with a teacher to build capacity around responding to challenging behaviors without removing the child from that classroom. And what we found in multiple states is that when a teacher has consistent access to early childhood mental health consultation, we're seeing suspension and expulsion rates decreased by 50% or more. In Connecticut recently, Walter Gilliam, who did the initial study that I talked about, found significant differences in teacher reports of externalizing behaviors when teachers had access to what they called their ECCP, Early Childhood Consultation Partnership. And we've seen some traction around this. Ohio actually just recently got $9.1 million in annual early childhood mental health consultation funding. May seem like a drop in the bucket, but in the early childhood world, that's a lot. Unfortunately, here in Massachusetts, we do have a program that it's called the Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Services Program. But from 2009 to 2016, during this very same period where we've been learning about how much this works and how much this matters, funding for this program has been cut by 75% in Massachusetts. So say you're in Massachusetts or you're in another state that doesn't have one of these robust programs, or even if you are, what can you do as an educator? Even in the absence of state-funded programs like the Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation, I think there are low-cost ways that we as educators can increase our awareness of the types of implicit bias that were mentioned at the beginning of the study and apply bias reduction strategies to create more inclusive early childhood or any grade classrooms. We know that our implicit biases come to the forefront when we have a heavy cognitive load, when there's a lot on our mind. If you've been a teacher, you know that's just about 99% of your day. We call these vulnerable decision points. These are times when, and we've all had them, right? So they tend to be times when a decision that we make in the moment seems logical, right? This child is screaming, he needs to leave the room. But then later in reflection, we realize that we didn't quite see that situation from the child's eyes, much as we see these two characters not quite seeing this number in the same way. And what's exciting is that there are tools to help us change this. The first is one you may have heard of, the IAT, the Implicit Awareness Test, which you can do for free on Harvard's Project Implicit website, that can help us be aware of our biases so we can think about what situations might trigger us to act on them. The next step is to actively adopt strategies that help us reduce our biases. And there's an exciting study from Patricia Devine at the University of Wisconsin that found 5 strategies: stereotype replacement, counter-stereotypic imaging, individuation, perspective taking, and increasing opportunities for cross-cultural or cross-race contact that result in enduring decreases in implicit bias around race. A group of researchers from Stanford took one of these strategies, perspective taking, developed a low-cost intervention, and found in a middle school that it cut their suspensions in half in 1 year. So what's next? I want to talk to you today about where I think we are right now. I have a lot of concern under the new administration that seems rather intent on rolling back many of the Obama-era federal guidance around discipline, that we may not make much progress in the coming years at the national level. I think the action is at the states. And more importantly, I think the action is in every classroom and in every school in this nation. And I want to leave us today with a challenge to look in the mirror and think about what Hillary said in that opening quote. I think implicit bias is a problem for everyone, not just police. I think, unfortunately, too many of us in our great country jump to conclusions about each other, and therefore, I think we all We need all of us to be asked the hard questions, why am I feeling this way? Thank you so much.